Kyle Dubas continued to reshape the Penguins roster on Friday by signing 2 new forwards to cheap contracts. Now, will these 2 forwards be on the Penguins roster to start the season? I'll have my answer on that coming up right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. I'm going to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at @LO_Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. Obviously, I am still on vacation. I am at the beach this week. We saw one big trade on Sunday with Alex DeBrincat going to Detroit. Will we see others this week while I'm away? Well, we'll just have to see. But starting the show off today, Penguins signed a couple of depth forwards after I finished recording and editing the show on Friday with Doug Lackey. I had to redo my intro, as you all likely listened to or watched on YouTube. The Penguins signed Vinnie Hinostroza and Andreas Johnsson, both to 1-year deals. Hinostroza is going to get $775,000 on this deal. Johnsson, $800,000 on his deal. We'll start with Hinostroza. Has spent time with the Chicago Blackhawks, Arizona Coyotes, Florida Panthers, and the Buffalo Sabres. He's played in almost 400 career games, 360 to be exact. During that time, 53 goals and 148 points. His best individual season came in 2018-19 when he had 16 goals and 39 points in 72 games. So he averaged a little over half a point per game during that time. Also had a 13-goal campaign with the Sabres, not this past season, but the season before that. So pretty decent numbers on the surface. I dove into his sim a little bit over the weekend here, even though I've been away. I really think he's a nice, shifty player on the ice. He's not going to burn you with his speed, but he'll still use it to his advantage a little bit. I also really like the release that he has with his shot. He's also super patient when he has the puck on his stick. He's not just looking to make a play for the sake of making a play. And because of his patience, he has pretty good finishing impacts. This past season ranked in the 68th percentile for finishing at 5-on-5 among all fourth liners in the NHL. So this is a player that really knows how to finish. Also ranks in the 74th percentile for 5-on-5 primary assists per 60 minutes. So decent playmaker as well. Draws a lot of penalties, so that means he's good with the puck on his stick. Ranks in the 73rd percentile for penalties drawn among all fourth liners this past season. 5-on-5 even strength offense, not going to give you too much there in terms of just offense in general. Defense, he's not really going to give you too much there either. But this is still a good player who can play in the bottom six when needed. Either way, he's going to be in this organization in some capacity. I don't think they're going to waive him before the season starts. It's all going to come down to whether or not he starts the season with the Penguins or if he starts in Wilkes-Barre. I've seen people compare this to the Drake Caggiula signing of last season. I understand that, but I think Hinostroza is better than Caggiula. He's a better finisher, better in terms of, primary assists per 60 minutes. I think he's a bit faster than a player like Caggiula. I don't think you're going to see Hinostroza spend 95% of this season in the AHL with Wilkes-Barre. Obviously, it's good competition to have, especially heading into camp, and I'm going to get into that a little later on in this episode, but I don't think he's going to be someone that's destined to be spending most of this season in Wilkes-Barre. So I really like this move. He's also 29 years old, so for the people that were going after Kyle Dubas for signing a bunch of guys over 30, 31, 32, well, you got someone who is below 30 with this one. It's also very, very cheap. Again, player who has been known to produce goals, assists. You're not going to get much in the defensive zone from him, but that's why the Penguins signed players like a Noel Acciari, like a Lars Eller, and like a Matt Nieto. As for the other player that the Penguins signed in Andreas Johnsson, I really think the Toronto history paid massive dividends for the Penguins. Remember, Johnsson was with the Maple Leafs when Kyle Dubas was the general manager during the 2018-19 season, so he has a familiarity with him. And funny enough, Johnsson had his best season to date in 2018-19 when he had 20 goals and 43 points. Since then, he has not touched those numbers. He's come close. He did have 13 goals and 35 points in 71 games during the 2021-22 season with the New Jersey Devils, but that's still not 20 goals and 43 points in a full season. For his career, he has 48 goals and 116 points in 259 games, only had 3 points in 13 games this season, is a pretty decent finisher, but where I think he excels at is his playmaking ability. I dove into the film this past weekend, and the amount of times I saw him thread beautiful passes while he was with the Devils, especially during the 2021-2022 season, was nothing short of extraordinary. Whether it was springing someone for a breakaway when it didn't look like there was much space, or whether it was an odd man rush, 2-on-1, 3-on-2, or whether it was a 2-on-2, 3-on-3 rush where it didn't look like there was that much space on the ice, he was still able to get the puck through. Boom, it's in the back of the net. And oh yeah, he's also a great passer in the high danger areas, meaning that 10 to 15 feet area from the net mouth. And all of that is supported by the underlying numbers. If you look at his numbers from the 2021-22 season, he ranked in the 70th percentile at 5-on-5 in terms of high danger assists, also ranked in the 78th percentile in terms of 5-on-5 passing, 92nd percentile in terms of penalties drawn. So like Vinnie Hinostroza, knows how to draw penalties when he has the puck on his stick, and ranks in the 92nd percentile in offensive impact. So this is a player who has done really well at the NHL level during multiple seasons. And honestly, right now, I would be stunned if he was not on the opening night roster. This player has a lot of talent, and I think he brings something to the Penguins' bottom six that is currently lacking right now. I don't really see anyone down there who is a good, true playmaker. Kyle Granlund can pass, but I think at this point, he's cooked a little bit. Outside of that, though, who else really has a decent playmaking ability? No one. A lot of the players that the Penguins signed, they're defensive first players. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you need a nice mix of both defensive players in the bottom six and offensive players. Johnsson fits that offensive mold. Hinostroza, he also fits that offensive mold and is a pretty decent finisher. I think he's a bit of a better finisher than Johnsson is. And if you combine both those two players with the three that Kyle Dubas signed, you have Drew O'Connor in the mix, Alex Nylander. I think the Penguins have the makings of a pretty solid bottom six heading into the 2023-2024 season. Remember, the Penguins' bottom six was one of the biggest reasons why this team missed the playoffs this past season. They couldn't score, and especially they couldn't keep the puck out of their own net. When the bottom six was on the ice at 5-on-5, the Penguins allowed 71 goals against and were only on the ice for 49 goals for. That is unacceptable in every possible way, and that cannot happen this next season. With the moves that Dubas has made, I don't think it's going to, especially with the defensive players. And if Johnsson can get back to the player that we saw he was even from a couple seasons ago, and Hinostroza as well, and you combine that with Drew O'Connor, who I think has some upside, Alex Nylander, and the other players, and I know Jeff Carter will probably be there in some capacity as well. I don't think the Penguins are going to rid themselves of him just yet. After the season, that's a different story. I think the Penguins have the makings of a pretty good, I think an improved bottom six heading into the season. So I am really excited about these moves. Let me know what you think about them down in the comments if you're listening on YouTube, or you can send me a DM on social media. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to dive into what this means for training camp, because I think for the first time in quite a while, we're actually going to have a fun training camp to monitor, because usually the Penguins don't have a lot of roster battles. That's going to change in a big way heading into mid to late September. But before we get into that, we do have to discuss FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get the first home run in a game. And it's all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball and Locked On. And I'm back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. So I can't believe I'm discussing training camp in almost mid-July now, but hey, I think camp is going to be a lot of fun this upcoming season. I'll actually go a step further and say this is probably the most fascinating training camp the Penguins will have in the last few seasons. Usually when camp rolls around, I'm like, okay, cool. The season's getting closer. Get to see some players going through drills, seeing how maybe some of the younger prospects are doing at first before they get shipped off to their junior teams. And that's just because the Penguins usually don't have many roster spots available. That's the thing. Their top forwards are set. Most of their bottom six forwards are set. Most of the defense is set. And most of the goaltenders are set. Sometimes you occasionally have someone who appears out of nowhere, like a John Marino. He burst onto the scene a few years ago, forced Jim Rutherford to trade Eric Goodbranson because Marino had such a good camp in a preseason. And maybe you get that from someone this year. Who knows? But the competition, especially down in the forward group, is going to be tense. And if you thought Drew O'Connor and Alex Nylander were locks to make the team, well, they're going to have to earn it now. And I am still someone who thinks O'Connor should be on the team to start the season, but it is not a lock in the slightest, especially after Hinostroza and Johnsson signed with the team on Friday, two players who have hundreds of games of experience in the NHL. Going up against them, Eller, Achari, Carter, Nieto. He will have to earn his spot on the Penguins going into this season. And you're going to see a lot of mock lineups between now and camp, and heck, during training camp as well. And I honestly don't know what the starting lineup is going to look like in terms of the bottom six for opening night against the Blackhawks, because there are so many options that Mike Sullivan has at his disposal. So that is the most intriguing aspect heading into camp. All of these moves create more competition, and I think you're going to see a very spirited camp once it rolls around in mid to late September. And honestly, this is not the only strong camp battle that we're all going to see. The backup spot to Tristan Jarry. Usually that's locked down. Casey DeSmith has had it for the past few seasons, and there's a chance that he may not be there. He could be traded before then, but right now it looks like he's going to be there. And if he is, he'll have some good competition. I don't think Alex Nedeljkovic signed with the Penguins to be a third goalie and dress for 5 to 7 games a season, especially for $1.5 million per season. He probably would have just signed with another team, but he's going to be competing with DeSmith, even though he has the better numbers, DeSmith, that is. You also have Magnus Hellberg. I think it's more likely he probably gets sent down to Wilkes-Barre, but signed a 1-year, one-way deal, has NHL experience, and he's going to be gunning for that backup spot as well. That's another battle I'm really interested in seeing. And of course, the battle on defense, especially on the left side. You have Marcus Pettersson, who's going to be there. You have Chris Tang on the right side, who's going to be there. Jan Rutta is going to be on the team. Right now, Jeff Petrie is there. Ryan Graves is going to be on the team. But who gets that last spot on the right side between P.O. Joseph and Ty Smith? I thought Joseph showed a lot of offensive improvement this past season, but I also thought he wore down the stretch, especially defensively, where he was missing on some of his assignments, was coughing up the puck a little too much in his own zone. Now he's going to be competing with Smith, who I and a lot of others, whether it's in the fan base or people who cover the team, thought that he was going to be on the team to start the season. The only reason why he wasn't on the team was because the Penguins legitimately had no cap space. That's how bad Ron Hextall bungled the cap. But he had a great camp and a great preseason. He is going to be gunning for Joseph's job if both are still on the roster. So that's another battle I'm very interested in seeing. The top six, I think that's set some combination of Gensel, Crosby, Raquel, Smith, Malkin, Russ. Maybe you move Raquel and Russ, up and down, back and forth, whatever you want. But For the first time in quite a while, there is more than one training camp battle for the Penguins heading into mid to late September. And I also didn't even mention Sam Poulin and Valtteri Puustinen. They're going to be gunning for jobs as well. I'm sure they both think that they belong at the NHL level, and they will be doing everything in their power to make the team out of camp. Maybe that forces someone to get traded, a la John Marino just a few years ago when Rutherford had to trade Goodbranson. It's probably more unlikely in that case because they would have a lot of people to beat out. But crazier things have happened. I'm really hyped for camp this year, a lot more than I normally am. But the forward competition is going to be fierce, and I'm excited to see what Mike Sullivan does for the bottom six on opening night. They usually split these groups, or split the players, into 3 groups at the start, 3 to 4 groups, I should say. And then it kind of goes down to 1 or 2 once some cuts are made after the first few preseason games. That's when it's going to get really serious. Heading into those final couple preseason games of all the players who are still on the team, seeing how they do in those games, that's when it's going to get a lot of fun. And these 2 signings just means that I'm ready for some action. That's for sure. But that wraps up this second segment of the podcast. Coming up to end the show, I'm going to dive into the topic of whether the Penguins are a playoff team heading into this season, even though I have them 4th in the Metropolitan Division after I did my rankings last week. That's coming up right after this. All right, and I'm back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember, follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at @LONSHowPenguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. So as I discussed in my Metropolitan Division power rankings last week, my post-July 1 power rankings, I should say, I have the Penguins 4th, but some years that's not good enough to make the playoffs. Some years you have 5 teams from a division make it and 3 in the other. Other years you have 4 and 4. That's just how it goes sometimes. But when I look at the Penguins right now, I do think they are 1 point better than they were last year, which would have gotten them in the playoffs. And I especially think they are better than the Islanders, who finished a point or 2 ahead of them this past season as well. I love the top 6. Riley Smith and Jason Zucker's replacement will give you 20 to 25 goals. Jake Gensel will give you 30 to 40 if he stays healthy, which I think he will. Sidney Crosby, if he doesn't go down a little bit, he'll probably give you 85, 90 points. Evgeny Malkin is probably good for 70 to 80. Rickard Rakell is good for 20 to 25, upwards of 30 goals. Brian Rust could have a big bounce back year. Love that unit. Bottom 6, as I've discussed throughout this episode, right now, I feel better about it going into the season than I did last Thursday. That's because it has a decent mix of offensive players and more defensive players. I still think it could use a little more offensive oomph if they wanted to sign someone else out there, though they don't have the cap space right now. But that's a discussion for another day. And honestly, they could probably accomplish that at the trade deadline if the Penguins are not getting what they thought they were going to get out of that unit during the season. But right now, that unit is better than the one from last season. Defensively, Chris Letang is going to have, I think, a monster year. He went through hell and back this past season with his stroke. His dad passing away, his broken foot. He's going to be training like hell this offseason, and I think you're going to see a big year from him. Marcus Pettersson's coming off, I think, the finest season of his career. Ryan Graves is there. Jeff Petrie for now is there. Maybe Erik Karlsson comes over. We'll have to see. There's really been no update when it comes to that. Got P.O. Joseph, Ty Smith, Chad Ruido, Jan Ruda, Mark Friedman. Still a decent defensive group. I think Graves is obviously a big improvement over Dumoulin, and it will be a big asset in transition and in the offensive zone. And if the Penguins do get Karlsson, I think if you stabilize him with someone like Graves or Pettersson, it will work. Goaltending-wise, if Tristan Jarry stays healthy, I think he's one of the best 10, 11 goaltenders in the league. And I will die on that hill. When healthy, he has put up good numbers. You don't just finish, again, 919 in one season and 921 in another by being a bad goaltender. That's not how it works. When healthy, he's good. If he can stay that way, I like the Penguins' chances of making the playoffs heading into the season. And when it comes to the teams around them from this past season, I'm not a big believer in the New York Islanders. I'm sorry. I just don't see it. Barzal's great. Sorokin's one of the best goalies in the league. Anders Lee is great in front of the net. Bo Horvat had a good start to his Islanders tenure, but he kind of faded down the stretch. But I don't think they're that deep. Outside of Pelican Pulak on defense, I don't think there's that much there. Sorokin will have to carry them to probably get at least some of the wins. But right now, I think the Penguins are a better team than the Islanders heading into the season. Panthers, that's going to be interesting. They're going to be without Montour and Ekblad, it looks like, through December, January. That's why they've been kind of linked in the Noah Hannafin talks with the Flames. Alex Lyon's no longer there. He went on a huge heater to end the season to bring the Panthers into the playoffs. With him no longer there, how is Sergei Bobrovsky going to do in a full season's workload? Because we all know how great he was when the Panthers went to the Stanley Cup final. Is he going to continue to do that? Or is he going to turn back into the pumpkin that he was, honestly, for most of his Panthers tenure so far? So that's a big question I have about the Cats. And in terms of the teams below the Penguins, like the Washington Capitals, who I'm sure will be gunning for a spot, the Buffalo Sabres, who had a really good year this past year, the Detroit Red Wings, who just traded for Alex DeBrincat, I don't think they've done enough yet to pass the Penguins, even though the Penguins missed the playoffs this past season. So right now, I do think this is a playoff team, especially if they can stay healthy, and especially in that case, Tristan Jarry. He gives them at least average goaltending to a bit above average goaltending. The Stars produce. The bottom six doesn't get caved in the way it did this past season. This team is in the playoffs next season, no matter what. And hey, it's July 10th. There is so much time to tinker with the roster. I still don't get the sense that Dubas is done. They're kind of in the waiting game for Karlsson. San Jose is being very patient. We'll have to see what happens with that. Carolina also hasn't done the D'Angelo trade. I'm sure they'll probably have other irons in the fire. Pittsburgh, that is. If Karlsson falls through and maybe he goes to Carolina, maybe a mystery team comes in and trades for him. But I don't think for a second that Dubas and company are done. But right now, if this is the final product heading into the season, I think this is a playoff team, but they'll be a wild card team. They'll probably finish 7th or 8th in the East and not in one of those top 3 spots in the Metro. At least right now, that's my opinion. But that will do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I really appreciate all of you listening / watching this episode of the podcast. Let me know what you think about whether this team is a playoff team down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or you can send me a DM on social media if you are there. I'll be back with another episode for you all on Tuesday. Remember, this is the last full week of daily episodes before the podcast goes down to 3 episodes a week. My goal for that starting next Monday will be Monday, Wednesday, Friday until training camp starts in mid to late September. So again, thank you all so much for listening / watching. I really, really appreciate it. I'll be back with another episode for you all on Tuesday.